He changed the will without telling me. That folder wasn't where we kept the bills. It was under the bed, behind his old slippers, wrapped in one of his undershirts like something sacred. Inside it, a trust certificate, her name in gold, mine erased like I never lived here. My jaw locked so tight I thought my teeth would snap. It was like I had been wiped clean from our story, one quiet line at a time. This was more than a betrayal. It was the beginning of an inheritance dispute I never agreed to. What if the man you gave your life to had quietly written you out of his? Her name was Frances. She was 68 years old and had lived her whole adult life in the pine-lined outskirts of Cottonwood, Arizona, a town where mornings smelled like warm dust and old wood. She had been married to Leonard for 43 years. Their home, a one-story house with green shutters and a porch swing that had long since stopped swinging, stood as a monument to their time together. Frances had been a librarian at the Cottonwood Public Library. Leonard sold life insurance until his retirement. He managed their finances. She managed everything else. When he fell ill, she stayed home to care for him, cooked his meals soft, changed his bedding, sat with him in silence on the hard days, and told stories from the past on the good ones. He would squeeze her hand, sometimes smile, sometimes not. He died on a Monday. The funeral was on Thursday. By Friday morning, her name was gone from everything that once belonged to them both. It was the first chapter in a family betrayal story that would unfold like slow thunder. It began quietly. The signs were small, like hairline cracks in a teacup. 2 months before he passed, Frances asked Leonard about a check that had bounced their electric bill. For the first time in decades, he told her not to worry, said he had moved some things around. He kissed her cheek. She didn't ask again. Then came the phone calls. Short, whispered. One ended with the words, "She won't have to know." Frances had stood at the kitchen sink, holding a sponge in one hand and a dripping glass in the other. The water ran until it overflowed, but she said nothing. She had always trusted him to take care of the numbers, the documents, the money. And so, she kept cooking, kept folding his sweaters, kept her faith, even when something inside her, a quiet knock in her chest, warned her otherwise. Then there was the trip. One weekend in early spring, Leonard insisted he drive alone to Phoenix to meet with an old friend about pension paperwork. Frances offered to go with him, but he refused gently, but firmly. He was gone 2 nights, came back with a new briefcase and a look she couldn't name. She chalked it up to fatigue. Later, she'd remember how distant he'd been since then, how she had caught him staring at his phone, fingers hovering but not typing, how he started locking his study, the one place she had always dusted freely. But none of it made sense. Not then. 1 week after the funeral, Frances sat in a lawyer's office, the air thick with lemon polish and the weight of unfinished grief. The lawyer, a man in his 40s with a practiced softness in his voice, slid a leather folder across the table. "This is the trust," he said. Leonard transferred all marital assets into it 6 months ago. The house, savings, retirement account, everything is under this structure now. Frances opened it with both hands. The paper trembled slightly. Under primary beneficiary was a name she had never seen in her life, Claire Roseman. The lawyer added gently, "She is his daughter." The world didn't fall apart. It just backed away, like someone had pulled the sky 3 steps backward and dimmed the sun. A daughter. Leonard never mentioned a daughter. No letters, no photos, no name whispered in the night. Frances blinked at the folder, at the printed ink, at the boldness of her absence. She wasn't just grieving. She was now a disinherited spouse, with no voice in the world she had helped build. "He changed the will without telling me. Are you sure this isn't a mistake?" she asked, her voice barely more than air. The lawyer shook his head slowly. "The documents are valid. Claire is the sole heir under the trust. The room blurred at the edges. She didn't faint, but she stood too fast, and the chair scraped loudly behind her. Her hands were useless now, cold, still. Her knees softened, but she stayed upright, as if shame alone was holding her together. She picked up the folder again, stared at the embossed seal, and began folding the top corner. Back and forth, back and forth. The crease deepened, then ripped. Her throat tightened, not with tears but with something worse. I was never part of his future. She thought of the time he said they should repaint the porch, the time he fixed the mailbox but didn't tell her where the new keys were, the time he said, "You take care of everything else. Let me handle the legal stuff." And she had let him take her name off the mortgage without asking. She had signed papers she didn't read because they're just for the accountant. She had believed in a shared life, and now, here she stood a ghost in her own story. That night, Frances didn't sleep in the bedroom. She sat at the kitchen table, a single lamp casting shadows on the refrigerator door. She turned Leonard's photo face down. Her hand lingered on the frame, and then she spoke the first words since the lawyer had said Claire. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. It barely made a sound. "You wrote me out, like I was a draft that never got published. Some betrayals do not come with shouting. They come in notarized envelopes, trust certificates, sealed signatures. What happened to Frances was not a mistake. It was retirement financial abuse, carefully prepared and disguised as normal planning. It happened because she let him handle it, all the papers, the passwords, the names on the titles, because she thought love and law could sit quietly in the same room. But in the eyes of the system, what is not written down might as well not exist. Leonard did not need her consent to set up a revocable living trust in most states. He did not even need to notify her if the assets were solely under his name. He took advantage of that. He took advantage of time, of her grief, of her trust. He took everything quietly, legally, but not honorably. And it worked until someone looked closely enough to see the pattern. What he did was not illegal in every state, but it was wrong. And in this case, it was inheritance betrayal, hidden behind a lawyer's smile. At its core, this was an inheritance dispute that wore a mask of respectability. Why did she let it happen? Because, like many women of her generation, Frances believed that if a man stayed, paid the bills, and kept his wedding ring on, he was doing right by her. She believed in the structure of money and marriage, not realizing how often one is used to control the other. She did not question the locked drawer. She did not read what she signed. She thought, "We have built this life together. Of course, I am protected." But elder financial abuse does not always come from strangers. Sometimes it wears the same hands that once tucked you in. Sometimes it is a man who never raised his voice, but still erased your name, and that erasure begins quietly long before the final blow. She remembered how he used to insist, "Let me handle the legal stuff," how the savings accounts were moved, how the title of the house quietly shifted. She remembered offering to go with him to Phoenix, and how he had said, "No, stay home. You've done enough." And she had stayed. She had folded his clothes, paid the property tax, planned the hospice care, all while the will manipulation in late life was already happening behind her back. This was not just about property. It was about being removed from your own life, being written out, not with violence, but with strategy. And it is more common than we want to admit. But Frances did not stop at the pain. She reached for truth. She reached for the law. Because grief is heavy, but silence is heavier. Because she knew if she stayed quiet now, it would happen to someone else. And this time, she had something stronger than trust. She had clarity. She had paperwork. And she had a name hers that she would never again let someone quietly erase. Frances did not win back everything, but she did win back something that mattered: the right to no longer be invisible. With the help of a local attorney who specialized in civil marital property law, She filed a claim contesting the trust. She brought documentation proof of their long marriage, tax filings, letters, photos. She submitted her name on utility bills, care records, and banking statements before the assets were moved. It was not simple. It took weeks of paperwork, phone calls, and hours sitting in waiting rooms that smelled like printer ink and tired carpet. But the judge reviewed the timeline and saw what her husband had tried to hide. The trust was declared a tool of intentional marital asset displacement. It was allowed to stand, but so was she. Frances received 50% of all assets moved during the final 12 months of Leonard's life. What began as a silent act of betrayal ended as a public inheritance dispute that restored her voice. The house was sold. The proceeds split. Claire, the daughter, was quiet throughout the proceedings. Frances never met her face to face. She did not want to. It was not about the girl. It was about what had been taken. Quietly, behind her back, with her portion. Frances did not buy a new house. She rented a small apartment in the heart of town, just a short walk from the Cottonwood Public Library. She went back once a week, not to work, but to sit, to read, sometimes to help another woman search for a lawyer's number. She started carrying a red binder. Inside it, a copy of her current living trust, her healthcare directive, and the property documents now in her name. Every first of the month, she unzipped the binder, checked everything, and she whispered to herself, "No one writes me out. Not anymore." One day, she left the binder open on the coffee table. Her neighbor, Lorraine, stopped by to return a bowl. She saw the documents, asked what they were. Frances did not say much, just enough, just the truth. That night, Lorraine went home and asked to see her husband's will. That is how it begins, not with revolution, but with questions. The law can be cold, but paper holds power. And sometimes, picking up a pen is how you pick up your life. If you are over 60 and you do not know who is on your house, deed check today. If you have never read the latest version of your spouse's will, print a copy now. If your name is not on the trust, the account, the insurance, ask why, and write it down. This is not about suspicion. It is about protection. Your name is not a favor. It is a right. And if you have lived any part of Frances's story, leave a comment below, not to complain, but to remind someone else we are not alone, and we are not to be erased.